I'm Sonia Usatch-Kuhn, your host. Welcome to Poets on Poetry. I will be speaking with members of the North Carolina Poetry Society, and we will be discussing the myriad components involved in the process of writing a poem. My guest today is Hannah Ringler. She is a poet, gardener, and mom from Durham, North Carolina. She has a bachelor's degree in English and Japanese and a master's secondary education degree. Hannah is the statewide coordinator for the Poetry in Plain Sight program, widely known as PIPS. Welcome, Hannah.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Well, when you began writing poetry, since you have all this education, was it for a class? Or did something out of the blue hit you and you wrote your first poem?
Well, I was homeschooled when I was in middle school and high school, and one of the things that I had was a rhyming dictionary with poetry exercises in it and different types of poetry in it. So that became a class of sorts. My creative writing class was to write a poem a day using these prompts and different types of poems.
A poem a day.
A poem a day, which I did for several years.
That's a lot of poetry.
It was a lot of poetry, and it's all terrible and will never see the light of day.
Oh, well, there's revision. So
There
you
is
might have to
revision.
take a look at it.
But I look at it as the piles and piles of practice that you need to put in to get anywhere halfway decent.
So which particular elements, for example, theme, imagery, revision, do you consider as you put pen or pencil to paper, or do you go directly to the computer?
So, as you mentioned, I'm a mom.
Yeah.
And I'm very rarely able to sit down for any amount of time whatsoever. So many of my poems are written on my phone, standing over the kitchen sink doing dishes. Or waiting for the water in the tea kettle to boil, again on my phone. If I'm really lucky, then I'll have a few minutes to sit down with a pen and paper. So I think about a line or two or an idea while I'm doing something else, and hopefully it turns into something. There are more half-abandoned projects in my notes than I care to think about.
That's an interesting way of writing poetry. But you mentioned water twice, which means you have a background of something flowing.
That's true. I think that for writing poetry, it helps to really have um, a way to disconnect the mind from the present. And I think water really does that. It creates one of those liminal spaces. So when I was growing up and homeschooling, I lived on the river. And I would go down with my notebook to the river and write. And so now, falling asleep is one of those liminal mental spaces. Doing dishes, your hands are busy, your mind is elsewhere. Weeding the garden, hands are busy, mind is elsewhere. And driving, that's also a really productive time, unfortunately, because you then have to wait until you get somewhere or to a stoplight to write anything down.
And you must be concentrating and not thinking too much about poetry when you're driving.
Yes.
Okay. So to get back to the original question, is it theme that comes to you, imagery? What is it that you focus on?
I would say sound.
Sound.
Sound is something that comes to me with an image. Recently, I wrote a poem about mushrooms because I had been walking with a friend in the woods, and we had been talking about whether or not this little orange mushroom was available to forage. And reading into the mushroom, I learned about all of this eukaryotic life and the different components of it, and how in the dark the mushroom begins with this lovely orange cone, and then it starts to flip up like a little skirt. And the combination of the repetitive sounds around S's and L's tended to come in. And with that, also an image of the mushrooms having a little Charleston in the forest floor.
It's a very
silly little
complete
fun.
explanation. Okay. I have to ask you this. Have you written anything in Japanese?
Well, I have, but not poetry.
Oh, and will you attempt it someday, maybe?
Unfortunately, I don't really have the opportunity to practice Japanese very often. Right now, my third language is German, and I spend a lot more time on that. So I may attempt something in German one day, and my husband will laugh and laugh and laugh.
But have you, oh, you were going to attempt something.
I may.
Okay, fair enough. All right. Well, since you all have all of this mushroom thing, did you bring the mushroom bone?
I didn't bring the mushroom poem, but I've got one about oysters. How does that sound?
Sounds delicious. Why don't we let you do that?
On Florida's coast, ton after ton, a woman sinks oyster shells, the tender milk of their undersides wrenched, devoured, shattered. Day by day, she sweeps up the remnants of romance, rhymed in salt, the umbilical stub. She cycles through her tourist town with her buckets, watching people prized from themselves burrow into summer stories. I am wild, they say, cracking open rough shells, a cold one, tough exteriors, frozen faces. Their undersea pallor steamed a delicate pink, they migrate back again to their own reefs. The oysters never return home. The sea rises. One dinner at a time, she raises the reef, dreaming still, clear water.
Well, that's very beautiful.
Thank
I
you.
have to say that water seems to come up a lot in your life. Down by the river when you were growing up, into your poetry. So water must be a very big influence.
Water in the garden.
Water in the garden, right? The hose. And okay, I get it. All right. Well, let us, did you have another poem that you would like to read?
Yeah, here's one that I've written fairly recently called Happiest of Mothers.
Okay.
Holding my son, I remember Hecuba, happiest of mothers in the early days. Her glorious children, bold Hector, a handful, but happy, always. A generous child, he kept them hopping. Bright Cassandra walked early, spoke early, her mother worried. Where could a woman with wisdom find peace? She saw clearly, spoke truth. The god might have cursed her, no surprise she'd said no, but it gave good reason not to listen when no one wanted to. And Paris, her last gift, unlooked for, he'd fluttered so gently, a peaceful baby, from womb to walking, her most loving child, she kept him close. They said he'd destroy them. What child doesn't? She shot back. Keeping him was never a question. That's the thing she could never wrap her head around. How could even Aphrodite force a mother to leave her child? An unnatural woman, Helen. But of course she loved Paris. What woman wouldn't? Our deadliest blessings, how we treasure them. In the news, one morning, a child killed his brother, 5 other people. And we are thankful on Thanksgiving that the shot went wide, missed my cousin driving home. Once a man so miserable, 70 witnesses testified they stood breast to breast in the same stall when he was gunned down. We ask what lack of tenderness made man into murderer, wonder where the wound lay. Perhaps the fields festered, poisoned Paris the shepherd. Yet what else could she have done? What else could she do? Paris, the latecomer, long loved, happiest of mothers. Oh, Hecuba knew.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. You've got a lot of things packed into this poem. Tell me first the inspiration for it.
Um, I really am interested in the Iliad right now. There have been a couple of very interesting translations, one by Emily Wilson and one by Caroline Alexander. Traditionally, the Iliad has, of course, been translated by men, so it's very interesting to see what women bring to the translation. And additionally, Alice Oswald did a wonderful poem based on the Iliad, which is just the deaths and the epic similes. And I've also read recently The Trojan Women by Euripides. So all of these different influences were kind of coming together and coming back and back again to Hecuba and how she was described as the happiest of mothers. And that kind of resonates with you when you have your own child and you're holding your child and seeing all of these things in the news about what children grow up to be and how Hecuba had all of these wonderful, beautiful children who she had 50. She was perhaps overly blessed with children, and they were all of them beautiful and talented and clever and wise, and yet how they grew up and what they did and how they died. And there she was at the end of it. And that kind of came together with the Headingham shooting in Cary not so long ago.
Yes, I picked up on the shooting. So you brought that mythological story to life, and you included, somehow you wove in what is happening in today's world too.
I think that that is one of the things that epics are good for. They give us a lens into our own lives, and particularly the older ones, they teach us that these emotions are constant. When I was teaching, the Epic of Gilgamesh was the easiest of the epics for my students to understand, and it's the oldest.
When you were teaching, did you teach poetry?
I did. I got to teach
Okay.
one class of poetry, and that was a real gift.
Okay. And you taught adults or children?
Children, high school students.
High school students. And they wrote poems as part of the course?
Every day.
Every day. Okay. You are consistent. Okay. So, thank you very much for reading those beautiful poems. Your images are really very beautifully written.
Thank you.
So what I would like to talk to you about now is poetry in plain sight.
Yes.
Let's do pips. Tell me how pips evolved and why did it evolve?
So it started in 2013 in Winston-Salem as part of the Winston-Salem Writers Network. And I forget who the original person who started it was, but after a couple of years, Sam Barbee took over and he ran it for a decade.
Who? Say again?
Sam Barbee.
Sam Barbee.
He is a great poet and a really conscientious runner of the program. And I was very blessed to receive his guidance as I transitioned into this role. So I think he took it over from the second year. And
That means it's now in its third year?
oh no, it's in its 14th year.
Oh, I didn't know it
Maybe
was that
15th.
old.
Yeah, it's from
All right.
2013.
Okay. So how did you come to get it and what are your plans for it?
Sam was getting a little tired of running it after such a long time, so he mentioned in the North Carolina Poetry Society newsletter, which you can sign up for online, that he was looking for someone to take over. And I thought, oh, people are going to be beating down the door to take this program over, but I'll say I can do it. I've got some time right now. I'm at home with my son. So I offered, and Sam took me up on it.
Okay, so what are your duties?
My duties include running the program, so I need to running the contest. In September, we'll open submissions every year, and those submissions are open for a month or a month and a half. And I need to sort through the entries, contact the poets if there are any discrepancies in the entries, find judges, compile a document of anonymized poems for the judges, make sure the judges get me their decisions back in time.
Okay.
I also design the posters. This year, we've got an exciting new feature, which is that there are QR codes on all of the posters almost that correspond to a video hosted on YouTube where the poets read their own poems aloud.
Terrific.
So I got all of the poets to make the recordings and then generated the QR codes, put the thing on YouTube, put it all on the posters. I'm currently in the phase of getting all of the proofreading done. We're in the final checks with the poets, and then I need to get them printed and sent off to all of the host city coordinators who also change from time to time. And I also need to coordinate the lunch. So it's a pretty busy time right now.
It certainly is, and it's poetry on technology also.
Yes.
So it was my understanding that the PIPs, the plain sight portion, was a display of the poetry that was written. So where was it displayed?
So initially it was displayed in the downtown Winston-Salem Arts District, and that's traditionally been the location where you can find posters for poetry in plain sight. However, some of my host city coordinators have had really brilliant ways of getting the poems into more eyes. And I've been so excited to see some of the feedback we've been getting from the auto repair shop and the Pilates studio. We hear the most from the Pilates studio. There are Pip's posters at a soup kitchen in Charlotte. And I think that it's really important that poetry is not limited to places where you can expect to see it.
Like a bookstore.
Like a bookstore or in an art gallery.
Or an open mic.
Or an open mic, but that it's truly in plain sight, because poetry is something that is truly accessible to all people when they have the opportunity to read it. And so it's very important to me that we get the poems to a wider variety of people than just the people who are going into art galleries on a Saturday night.
And was it on buses?
It was on buses. There was a wonderful run in Winston-Salem where they had it in buses for a little while, and I hope that one of the host cities will take that up again at some point. There was also a fantastic collaboration with artists where the artists took a poem from the series that they were inspired by and created a piece of art. And there was a wonderful gallery display of that at one point. So that would be something we'd like to do again as well.
Okay. Is there any up right now that anybody can see?
Yes, we have them in towns all across North Carolina, which I don't have up right now. So we have them in Greensboro, Durham, Raleigh, Winston-Salem, Charlotte, Asheville, Hendersonville, Hickory, and a couple other places that I currently can't bring to mind.
Well, I think we better get some in Fuquay-Varina.
Yeah. Find me a coordinator. I'll get you some posters.
Okay. So before we run out of time, can you tell our listeners how to submit?
So in September, go to the North Carolina Poetry Society website. Which is North Carolina or ncpoetrysociety.org, I think. And if you look to the contests, Poetry in Plain Sight is listed there. And there will be a link either to Submittable or to a Google form where you can submit. We're kind of working out what exactly we're going to do for next year's submissions right now.
Okay. Well, that makes it clear to the audience, I hope, on how to submit, but they can always go to the website and find out again.
The directions are really clear on the website.
Very clear.
Very clear.
That's important because poets think differently. They may not follow directions.
That's true, but I'm a teacher.
Oh.
A high school teacher.
So
I'm used to people not following directions.
Right. Clear directions. Okay. So today is Leap Year Day.
Yes.
That's a love day. We've got an extra love day. And with whatever horrible things are going on in this world, it is my feeling that we should add some love. And what a best way to do that is with a love poem. Did you bring one?
I did. I wrote a poem for my sister's wedding, and I brought that poem today.
Well, I think it's time for you to read it.
Before the wedding, my sister said, I wrote a list, I wrote a draft, and then I wrote a poem about oxen instead of wedding vows. I tell my sister that oxen are, as symbolism goes, traditional for marriage, working in tandem, yoke worn smooth from years, a comfortable straight line heaved through the dark earth. Unless there is a rock, as there often are in fields. Oxen aren't known for going wild, dashing from the field in a bovine Thelma and Louise joyride, plows skipping over the surface like a yo-yo. They like their hay, a nice stall at the end of the day, someone to nibble at their ears from time to time. And marriage is, as everyone tells you, ad nauseum, ad infinitum, ad perpetuum work. Oxen are known for it, for untiring labor, for patience, for suffering fools, which we all are, and not infrequently at that. But castration seems like a bad metaphor for a marriage.
Yes.
On the other hand, that's marriage too, picking and choosing what's important, what's worth holding to. So here are some vows: a straight furrow and a return to it, soft green shoots tended carefully, shade under a wide tree, in the dark, warm breath, a quiet touch.
Oh, it's lovely.
Thank you.
Did your sister love it?
She did. The bit about castration was her favorite part. She has a very funny sense of humor.
She must. Entering marriage with castration on your mind. Well, Hannah, is there anything you would like to add about the Poetry Society? Because I think we're coming to the end of our program.
The North Carolina Poetry Society is a wonderful organization, and it has wonderful resources for poets in terms of both contests that you can enter and events that you can go to, but also in terms of a community. I have found an amazing community in the North Carolina Poetry Society, and the events are fantastic, and I highly recommend that everyone join. It's also free if you happen to be under 18, so that's really good. We're always looking for young poets to get involved, and I think that the mentorship that is available for young poets is fantastic. And I especially encourage young poets to submit to Poetry in Plain Sight. I want to feature young poets for an entire month, not this year, but next year. So please submit.
Well, Hannah, thank you for a lovely and informative chat here on Poets on Poetry. Here's a word of encouragement from Sylvia Plath. And by the way, everything in life is writable about if you have the outgoing guts to do it and the imagination to improvise. The worst enemy to creativity is self-doubt, something we suffer from. Okay. Well, you've been listening to Poets on Poetry. This is Sonia Usatch-Kuhn, Rashawn Media, Peter Rashawn, producer.